It was cold on that bench, not freezing, but the kind of cold that sits in your bones and doesn't leave, no matter how tight you pull your coat. I'd been sitting there for over an hour, maybe two. My hands were stiff, folded in my lap. The metal bench was damp underneath me, and the cushion I'd meant to bring was still sitting by my front door, where I forgot it in the rush. My suitcase leaned against my leg. I hadn't moved it since I sat down. The tin of honey biscuits was still inside, right on top. I'd packed them carefully that morning. Now they were probably smashed to pieces. The station was mostly empty. A man in work boots paced near the vending machines. One of the machines was humming, louder than it should. There were old posters peeling off the walls, and the big clock above the ticket booth ticked louder than I remembered clocks could. I didn't have a watch on me, and my phone had died sometime earlier. I wasn't sure when. I'd stopped checking it after the second hour. No one was calling anyway. I could still feel the dampness in the air from the rain that morning. Just a soft drizzle when I left the house. The sky had looked heavy, like it had more to give. I had planned to bring an umbrella, but Bernice showed up earlier than she said she would. And in the rush, I left that behind too. She didn't park in front of the house. She pulled up halfway down the block and honked twice. I didn't like that. I stood there at the door for a moment, hoping she'd get out and walk up. She didn't. So I carried my bag down the steps myself and climbed into the passenger seat. She didn't say much, just something about the weather and how traffic had been awful. She didn't ask if I had everything or if I was feeling all right. She barely looked up from her phone. The drive to the station was quiet. I asked about Warren. She said he was busy with work. I asked about Rena. She said, "You'll see her soon." That was it. When we got to the station, she pulled into the side lot and parked close to the curb. "I've already booked the ticket," she said quickly. "You just need to give your name inside. They should have it ready." She didn't turn off the car. Her hands stayed on the wheel. I waited a second, thinking she'd come in with me. She didn't move. "Well, thank you," I said, reaching for the handle. She nodded. "Let me know when you get there." Then she looked back down at her phone. I got out, pulled my suitcase from the back seat, and shut the door gently. She didn't wait. She drove off before I even reached the sidewalk. I watched the taillights disappear at the corner, then turned and walked through the glass doors. Inside, the air was still. A few travelers scattered here and there. The lights above flickered slightly, and the ticket counter looked like it hadn't seen a fresh coat of paint in 20 years. I walked up to the woman behind the glass. "I'm supposed to have a ticket," I said. "My daughter-in-law booked it for me, Patricia Schaffer." She typed something into her computer. Then again. Then she frowned. "There's nothing here under that name," she said, eyes scanning the screen. "Are you sure it was for today?" "Yes," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "She told me to just give my name." She checked again, then shook her head. "I'm sorry, there's no ticket, nothing in our system." I stepped away slowly, holding my purse tight, sat down on the bench near the window, took out my phone. It was at 2%. I tried calling Bernice. It rang once, then went to voicemail. I didn't bother leaving a message. 10 minutes later, the screen went black. I looked around the station again. The man in boots was still pacing. A young mother walked past with a toddler pulling at her coat. No one looked at me. I must have looked like I belonged there, an older woman with a travel bag, just waiting. But I wasn't just waiting. I wasn't early. I was stuck. No ticket, no phone, no ride home. I thought maybe Bernice would come back. Maybe she'd realize something had gone wrong and turn around. But the longer I sat, the quieter that hope became. The station grew colder, not just in the air, but in the way it settled around me. No one came. No one asked. I just sat. It wasn't just the rain that morning. It was everything. The rushed goodbye, the silence in the car, the way she drove off like she had somewhere better to be. And that bench, that station, that silence, it made something very clear. I wasn't waiting anymore. I had been left. Now let me tell you about the invitation that didn't feel like one. The phone call came on a Thursday afternoon. I remember because I was folding towels and watching the news with the volume turned low. My phone rang on the table beside me, and when I saw Bernice's name pop up, I froze for a second. She never called me. Not once in nearly a year. I held the phone for a moment, just staring at it like it might vanish. Then I answered. Hello? Her voice came through, light but clipped. Hi, Patricia. Hope you're doing okay. I waited. She didn't ask how I was or if I had a moment, just kept going. Rena's birthday is this weekend. She's turning 10. We're doing something small, just cake, a few of her friends. Warren thought it'd be nice if you came. She paused after that, like she expected me to say no. Oh, I said, caught off guard. That's kind of you to invite me. There was a silence on her end. Then she added, we figured it's been a while. Rena mentioned your honey biscuits the other day. You could maybe bring some if you're up to it. That part stung a little, not the request. The way it was said, like a task, not a gesture. I'd be happy to, I said, quietly. She told me she'd pick me up Friday morning and drive me to the station. She mentioned the train was faster than the bus, and that Warren had a work thing, so they couldn't come get me later. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. All right then, she said. See you tomorrow. And just like that, she hung up. I stood in the kitchen for a while after the call, the towels still half folded, my heart unsure whether to beat fast or slow. It was the first invitation I'd gotten from them in a long time, maybe since Ronald's funeral. Part of me wanted to believe it was genuine. Maybe Rena had really asked for me. Maybe Warren missed me and didn't know how to say it. Maybe this was the beginning of something better. I pulled out my old suitcase that night and began packing, slowly, with care. I started with the navy cardigan I always wore to church, warm but neat. Then my soft-soled shoes, because they were easier on my knees. I laid out my maroon scarf, the one I knitted for Rena last spring. It had little yellow daisies stitched along the edge. I never mailed it. I kept telling myself I'd wait until I saw her again. I also took out an old tin from the pantry. I washed it, dried it, and lined it with wax paper. That's where I'd put the biscuits once they cooled. After that, I opened the small drawer in my bedroom and pulled out a picture, just one. It was Warren and me, years ago. He was probably 12, maybe 13. We were standing in front of the community center, both grinning like we didn't know life would get harder. He had one arm slung around my waist, and chocolate ice cream smeared on his chin. I slipped the photo between the pages of a book I planned to carry in my purse. Not to show, just to have. Packing used to be routine. Now it took time. I sat down between each step. I checked and rechecked things. I made sure the tea kettle was unplugged, even though I hadn't used it. At one point, I opened the file cabinet in the hallway and pulled out the folder marked Trust and Estate. Ronald's handwriting was still clear on the label. He was always neat, always prepared. He used to tell me, never sign something you haven't read twice, and always keep a clean copy for yourself. I didn't need to look through the documents just then. I just wanted to know they were there, where they belonged. That night, I baked the honey biscuits, just like Rena liked them. Not too sweet, a touch of cinnamon. I let them cool on the rack while I listened to the oldies station on the kitchen radio. When I went to bed, I set my alarm for 6 o'clock and placed my purse by the door. My suitcase was packed and zipped. The tin was sealed, the scarf folded neatly on top. I sat on the edge of the bed for a moment before pulling back the covers. I didn't know what to expect, but part of me hoped I'd walk into their house and feel welcome. Hoped Rena would run up and hug me like she used to. Hoped Warren would smile and say, "I'm glad you came, Mom." Maybe we could talk about the weather, the news, the little things. Maybe that would be enough. I turned off the lamp and lay in the dark, listening to the ticking clock across the room. I wanted to believe this time would be different. I was still sitting on that bench when the older woman walked in. She didn't look like someone rushing to catch a train. She moved slowly, like she had time. A red scarf wrapped around her neck, soft gray curls peeking out from under a wool hat. She glanced around the waiting area, then stopped when her eyes met mine. Not a long stare, just enough to notice I was still sitting there with the same bag, same purse, and no movement. She walked over gently. You all right, hun? I nodded once. I'm fine, I said, though I knew it didn't sound convincing. She didn't press, just looked down at the suitcase beside me and said, You've been here a while. My shop's just across the street. I run a little bookstore. It's warm, and there's tea if you'd like a break. I hesitated. My feet hurt. My back ached. I hadn't had a sip of water in hours, but still, it was hard to accept kindness when you're already feeling invisible. She must have sensed it. No pressure, she said softly, but sometimes sitting somewhere else makes things feel different. Her name was Carolyn, and she offered to carry my suitcase. I told her I could manage. We crossed the street slowly. The wind had picked up, brushing across our faces, tugging at my coat. The bookstore sat on the corner, tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop. The sign above the door read, Carolyn's Used and Rare. The window was slightly fogged, but I could see shelves stacked with books of all sizes and colors. Inside, the warmth hit me first. The air smelled like lemon wood polish and paper. Not new paper, but the kind that had been turned many times. Come on in, she said, stepping behind the front desk. There were 2 chairs near the window. One was covered in a patchwork quilt. The other had a soft cushion that looked hand-sewn. She motioned for me to sit. I eased down, my knees cracking as I did. I hadn't realized how stiff they'd gotten. Carolyn disappeared into the back for a moment, then returned with a mug of tea. She set it on a coaster beside me and didn't say a word. Lemon, she said. Hope that's okay. It's perfect, I said. I wrapped my hands around the cup. It was warm. My fingers had been so cold, I hadn't noticed until they started to thaw. She sat across from me and opened a book but didn't read, just sat there, letting me settle. I looked around. The walls were filled with shelves, some leaning, others neatly stacked. A small radio played faintly in the background. There was a blanket folded on one chair, a basket of bookmarks near the register, and a photo of 2 kids in baseball uniforms taped to the back of the counter. I sipped the tea slowly. It was tart and plain, no sugar, but it tasted real. I don't want to be a bother, I said, finally. Carolyn looked up. You're not. Sometimes we all need a chair and a warm drink more than anything else. I nodded. She didn't ask where I'd come from. She didn't ask why I'd been sitting alone in that station. And I was grateful for that. For a while, we sat in a silence that didn't feel heavy. It was quiet, but it didn't press down on me. Eventually, she stood and reached for a pillow on the shelf. She placed it on the small sofa, tucked into the back corner of the shop. If you need to rest, she said, this one's softer than it looks. I didn't argue. I was too tired. I carried my purse with me, placed it on the table beside the couch, and laid down slowly. She draped a thin quilt over my legs, without saying a word. My eyes closed almost as soon as my head touched the cushion. The last thing I remember before sleep was the quiet creak of the floorboards as she moved behind the counter, the rustle of a page being turned. It was the first real rest I'd had in weeks. I didn't dream. I didn't worry. For the first time in a long time, I just let go. I got back home the next afternoon. The ride was long, and the sky had gone from gray to that dull white that makes everything look colder than it is. My neighbor, Mr. Dillon, nodded at me as I unlocked my front door. I gave him a tired wave and went inside without saying much. The house was still. I didn't bother taking off my shoes, just stood there for a minute, holding the handle of my suitcase and letting the silence settle. Everything smelled the same. Clean floors, faint lemon oil from the furniture polish I'd used before I left. I set my bag by the coat rack and walked straight to the hallway closet. It wasn't a fancy place, just an old metal file cabinet pushed against the back wall. Ronald used to keep all the important papers there: wills, insurance, property records. He always believed in paper trails. I knelt down and opened the bottom drawer. It stuck a little, like it always did, but I gave it a tug and it popped loose. The folders were all labeled in his handwriting. Neat, even after all these years. I pulled out the one marked Trust Rhina. It was thick. I hadn't touched it since before her 8th birthday. Back in the dining room, I laid the folder out on the table and opened it. The edges of the papers were slightly curled, but everything was where it should be. I flipped past the first few pages. The setup, the terms, Ronald's notes. He had named me sole trustee. Nothing could be touched without my signature. Then I saw it. A bank letter, tucked behind 2 quarterly statements, dated a few weeks ago. It wasn't one I remembered seeing. I opened it and read. The letter confirmed a request to release a portion of the trust, not to Rena's education account, but to a separate account under a different name. Attached was a scanned document, an approval form, and at the bottom of that form was my name. My signature, only it wasn't mine. It looked close. Same cursive, same looped P, even the little curl at the end of the S. But it was off. The lines were too even. The letters too perfect. I knew exactly where it came from. One of the birthday cards I used to send Raina. I always signed them the same way, with love and my full name, so she'd recognize it later when she was older. I used a blue ink pen. I'd always written it gently, with care. Whoever copied it had tried hard, but they didn't know how my hand wobbled just slightly on the F, or that I didn't cross my T all the way through anymore. I stared at that paper for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just felt clear. I set the letter aside and went to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, took a sip, and came back to the table. Then I reached for my notepad, the one I kept near the phone, and started writing. I made a list. First, the things I'd seen. Bernice dropping me off without walking me in, the missing ticket, the dead phone, no calls, no messages. Then, the things I'd heard. Her saying Warren was too busy. Her reminding me how hard it is to manage everything. The way she brought up my memory last Christmas, like it was a casual concern. Then I wrote down what I hadn't said out loud until now. She never invited me. She planned for me to be out of the way. She thought I wouldn't check the papers. She believed I'd trust her more than my own instincts. I put the pen down and leaned back in the chair. The dining room was quiet. The kind of quiet that feels like truth settling in. I looked down at my list. They didn't think I'd look through the folder. They didn't think I'd remember the details. They didn't know I kept things, that I paid attention, that I was still the woman Ronald trusted to carry his wishes. I picked up the forged form again and ran my fingers over the page. They thought I'd forget. They didn't know I was watching. The next morning, I called Kendall Frey's office. I didn't leave a long message, just my name, and that I needed to see him about the trust. His assistant called me back before noon and said he could fit me in the next day. I got there a little early. His office still looked the same. Brick on the outside, small wooden sign by the door, and that odd little bell that jingled when you walked in. The waiting room smelled faintly of coffee and paper. His assistant smiled when she saw me. "He's been expecting you, Ms. Schaffer. Go on in." I stepped into his office, and there he was. Same warm smile, still wearing those wire-rimmed glasses. His hair had thinned some, but he stood up with the same steady energy I remembered. "Patricia," he said, reaching out. "It's good to see you. Been a while." "It has," I said, shaking his hand. He motioned for me to sit. "What brings you in today?" I opened my bag and took out the copy of the forged letter and the withdrawal request from the bank. I laid them on his desk without saying much. He adjusted his glasses and started reading. After a minute, he leaned back. "This signature isn't yours." "No," I said. "But they thought I wouldn't check." He nodded slowly, then reached into his filing cabinet. He pulled out the original trust documents. It took him a minute to find the section, but when he did, he slid it across the desk so I could read it. "There it is," he said, tapping the paragraph with his finger. "Ronald wanted this added near the end. We discussed it at length." I read the words carefully. "Any attempt to falsify authorization, or to coerce or mislead the trustee, shall result in immediate and permanent disqualification from the trust. Reinstatement requires written consent from the trustee and a court-appointed elder rights advocate. I sat back in the chair and folded my hands in my lap. So if I sign off today, they're cut out? He nodded. Yes. I'll freeze all access until further notice. No withdrawals. No communication from them will change that unless you approve it. I didn't hesitate. Do it. He pulled out a short form and filled it in by hand, then passed it across the desk. I read it line by line and signed it with my full name. Carefully, slowly. Kendall took the paper and made a copy before calling the bank. I sat quietly while he spoke with the trust officer, confirming the freeze and citing the specific clause. His voice was calm, not cold, just steady. When he hung up, he turned to me. It's done. Effective immediately. If they try anything else, the bank will flag it. I nodded. I didn't feel relief. Not anger either, just a sort of stillness. Kendall leaned back in his chair. Do you want to pursue fraud charges? We can file a report, get the state involved. It's your right. I thought about that for a moment. About court dates and news I didn't want. About Rena seeing her parents dragged into something she didn't understand. Not right now, I said. Let them wonder for a while. Let them sit with what they've done. He gave me a respectful nod. You let me know if that changes. I'll keep this on file, and we'll maintain a clean record. I stood up and gathered my things. He walked me to the door, same way he used to when Ronald was still alive. You know, he said quietly. Ronald always said you had the sharpest memory of anyone he knew. Looks like he was right. That made me smile, just a little. I stepped out into the daylight. The air felt cooler than when I walked in, but not in a bad way. Like something had lifted. Not everything, but enough. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't need to. I had done what needed to be done, without yelling, without begging, without needing anyone's permission. They might never say sorry. They might never own up to what they tried to pull. But it didn't matter now. They weren't part of the trust anymore, and they hadn't earned a place back in it. I walked slowly down the sidewalk, watching the leaves tumble across the concrete. I didn't want revenge. I wanted the truth to hold its place. 3 days after the meeting with Kendall, a courier knocked at my door. Young man, couldn't have been more than 20. I opened it slowly, still holding a dish towel in my hand. Delivery for Patricia Schaffer? He asked. I nodded. He handed me a large envelope, thick and sealed tight. Needs your signature. I signed, closed the door behind me, and carried it to the kitchen table. No return address, but I already knew. I recognized the overly neat handwriting on the front. Bernice had always tried to make her penmanship look polished. It never looked natural. I sat down, took a breath, and opened it with the butter knife I'd been using just a few minutes earlier. Inside were 2 pages and a folded slip of paper. The letter was typed, no Dear Patricia, just my name at the top and her initials at the bottom. She wrote about recent confusion. She said I seemed forgetful during our last few conversations. She said Warren had noticed it too. Claimed they had only been trying to help by stepping in. No mention of the forgery. No mention of the train station. Nothing about the withdrawal request. Instead, it was written like I'd misunderstood everything. That this was all a simple mistake caused by my condition. I turned to the second page. It was a health note, supposedly from a clinic I hadn't visited in over 3 years, dated 2 weeks ago. It listed vague things like slower recall, difficulty maintaining focus, and mild forgetfulness consistent with age. At the bottom, a signature from a doctor I remembered faintly. He once treated me for a stubborn cold and sent me home with a prescription and a smile. I hadn't seen him since. It was clear what they were doing, trying to build a case that I couldn't handle my own affairs, that I wasn't capable. I looked at the envelope again. Tidy, professional, as if that could dress up the lie inside. I didn't tear it up. I didn't curse or cry. I placed everything back in the envelope and took it into the spare room. I pulled out the folder I'd started the night I got home from the train station. The one where I kept the forged trust document, the bank letter, my notes, the copy of Kendall's signed order. I added the letter from Bernice and the fake clinic note. Then I made copies of everything. 3 full sets, one for me, one for Kendall, one for the state. I spent the next morning writing a simple cover letter, no fluff, just dates, facts, and a calm explanation of what had happened. I included everything: how I was dropped off, the forged documents, and now the false health claims. When I finished, I walked to the post office, mailed it certified, return receipt, addressed to the Elder Justice Unit. The clerk stamped it and handed me the receipt. I folded it, placed it in my wallet, and walked home without looking back. I wasn't doing it to get even. I wasn't trying to ruin anyone. But I wasn't going to disappear quietly either. They wanted to paint me as someone who couldn't keep up, someone slipping. What they didn't count on was that I still had every file, every name, every date. I kept everything because Ronald taught me to. He always said, "Quiet doesn't mean blind." He was right. That night, I sat at the kitchen table and poured myself a glass of water. I looked out the window at the streetlight flickering across the driveway. I thought about how easy it would have been to let it go, to say nothing, to tell myself it wasn't worth the trouble. But it was, because I mattered. My voice still mattered. They didn't get to erase me just because it was easier than telling the truth. I folded the extra copies and placed them in a new folder labeled Submitted. I didn't know what the state would do with it. Maybe nothing, maybe something. But I'd done my part. I'd made it known. And that, to me, was enough for now. I didn't need noise or drama, just the strength to say, "You were wrong," and I saw it all. A week after mailing the report, I went back to Kendall's office. I didn't call ahead, just walked in, holding my purse under one arm and a manila envelope under the other. He saw me from his office doorway and smiled gently. "I've got time," he said, stepping aside so I could come in. I sat down across from his desk and handed him the envelope. Inside were the final documents I wanted him to file. "I want them removed," I said, "both Warren and Bernice." He opened the folder, nodded, and started reviewing. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." "And Rena?" I paused. "That one wasn't easy." "Take her name off too," I said quietly. "For now, she's still a child. She didn't ask for any of this, but when she's older, we'll see." He didn't question it, just kept writing. Once the new documents were prepared, I signed everything again. Firm, clear. My hand didn't shake. It took all of 15 minutes. When it was done, I felt lighter. Not happy, not sad, just right. Like the door I hadn't been able to close for years had finally shut. Later that day, I visited a different bank, one I'd never used before. The woman at the desk was kind, not too chatty. She helped me open a new account in my name only. I didn't link it to anything. No automatic transfers, no beneficiaries listed. I wasn't hiding it. I just wanted it to be mine. After that, I made a few calls. Quiet ones, simple ones. I contacted the women's shelter I volunteered at years ago. Sent them a donation. Nothing flashy, just enough to cover warm meals for a few nights. Then I wrote a check to the local senior center to help restock their small library. The last one I mailed was to the literacy program at the community hall. I used to help kids there with reading after school. Ronald would wait in the car with a newspaper while I stayed inside correcting spelling sheets. Those were good afternoons. Each letter I wrote felt like a piece of me going back where it belonged, not to family, to purpose. That Saturday, I went back to Carolyn's bookstore. The bell above the door jingled the same way it had that first day. She looked up from behind the counter and smiled. "Tea?" "Only if you've got lemon," I said. She poured us each a cup, and we sat in the chairs near the window. I told her I had an idea, starting a small reading circle for women like us. Nothing fancy, just a few hours every other week. A place to read, talk, and sit in peace. She didn't even hesitate. "Let's do it," she said. We put up a small sign on the window the following Monday. Nothing big, just black marker on white paper. "Thursday Reading Circle, 10 a.m., all welcome." The first week, 3 women came. The next week, 5. By the third week, we had to pull chairs from the back. It wasn't loud or crowded, just steady voices, warm tea, and the quiet joy of being heard. Some of them came with books, some just listened. We laughed more than I expected. One woman, Alice, told me she hadn't read a book in 20 years. But she came every week just for the company. That made it worth it. On Sundays, I started walking to the park again. There was a bench near the small pond where I used to take Rena to feed the ducks. I hadn't gone in a long time. That first morning back, I sat with a small bag of breadcrumbs and waited. A few ducks waddled up like they remembered me. I tossed the crumbs slowly, watching them paddle around and peck at the water's edge. I used to sit there for hours with Rena. She'd giggle every time a duck flapped its wings too fast. We'd share a sandwich, and she'd always save the last bite for me. That day, I sat alone. But it didn't feel empty. The sun came through the clouds, soft and steady. I leaned back and closed my eyes for a minute, just enough to feel it on my face. Back at home, I opened the windows, let the air move through the house. I wiped the sills, watered the plant on the kitchen counter. It had started blooming again, small white buds at the tips. The curtains swayed gently. The floor creaked in familiar places. Everything was quiet, but not silent. There was life here again, and every bit of it was mine. It was a Wednesday morning, soft light coming through the curtains, when I heard something slide under my door. No knock, no bell, just the hush of paper moving across tile. I finished pouring my coffee before I went to check. I already had a feeling. There it was, a large white envelope, placed neatly, like someone wanted it to seem thoughtful. I picked it up, carried it to the kitchen, and sat down. I didn't open it right away. I took a sip of my coffee, then reached for the letter opener I kept in the drawer. Inside was a handwritten note. I recognized the loops in the writing. It was Bernice's. It started with my name. No greeting. She thanked me for not taking things further. She said she'd been reflecting, that she wanted a fresh start. She didn't mention the train station, or the forged document, or the false health note. Just that life gets complicated and people make mistakes. She hoped I'd be open to talking when things calm down. I read it once. No anger came, just a feeling like watching something fall flat, like a door quietly closing without anyone noticing. I folded the letter, walked into the back room, and slid it into the same folder where I kept the others. Not out of emotion, just for record keeping. That was the last piece of it, really. The end of the noise. Later that week, I went for a walk. I didn't have a plan. Just followed the sidewalk where it curved near the park, then over the small bridge that crossed the creek behind the neighborhood. Before I knew it, I was standing across the street from the Jefferson Street train station. Same chipped bricks, same fading posters on the glass doors, a bench still sitting near the front, damp from the last rain. I stood there for a moment, watching a few travelers roll their bags toward the entrance. A young man checking his phone, a woman digging in her purse for something. No one looked my way. I didn't expect them to. I thought of that morning, my suitcase at my feet, my phone dead, waiting on a bench that was never meant for me to leave from. I didn't cross the street. I didn't go inside. I turned and kept walking. There was nothing left for me in that place. Not anger, not sorrow, just nothing. I walked back through town. The air was cool, but not sharp. The breeze gentle. By the time I reached Carolyn's shop, the windows were glowing with soft light. The sign was still in the window. Thursday, reading circle, 10 a.m. Inside, 6 women were gathered in the back, near the small bookshelf we'd set up for shared titles. Some brought their own paperbacks, others just came to listen. Carolyn handed me a cup of tea as I walked in. Lemon, like always. I took my seat near the window, opened the book I'd brought, and began reading. The room went quiet, except for my voice. A few heads nodded along with the story. One woman closed her eyes, like she was letting the words settle in. We didn't need much, just a warm room, kind eyes, and a safe place to land. Afterward, we stayed and talked about things that didn't need fixing. Favorite recipes, A sale on fabric at the thrift store, how someone's grandson had finally learned to tie his shoes. The ordinary felt good, solid, whole. When the women left, Carolyn and I sat in silence for a bit, watching cars pass slowly outside the window. "You all right?" she asked. "I am," I said. And I meant it. Not because everything was back to how it used to be, but because I was standing in the middle of my own life again, on my terms. Later that night, I sat at my kitchen table with a small bowl of fruit and a notebook. I started writing a list, not of things to fix, but of things I'd rebuilt. My trust, my time, my peace. Not bad for 72. I may never hear another word from Warren or Bernice, and that's all right. Some things don't need reopening. I didn't need to answer the door. I had already answered myself. Have you ever been made to feel invisible in your own family? Have you ever had to reclaim your voice without raising it? If so, I see you. You're not alone. If this story touched something in you, leave a quiet heart in the comments or share your own story below. And if you'd like to hear more stories of women finding their way back to themselves, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Sometimes strength doesn't shout. Sometimes it just walks past the train station. Thank you for listening.